Question 1. During an audit of a global aerospace manufacturer's risk management system, a lead auditor is reviewing the application of quantitative risk analysis techniques to assess potential supply chain disruptions. The organization has employed a sophisticated simulation model that incorporates historical data, expert judgment on geopolitical instability, and probabilistic forecasting for component availability. The auditor needs to evaluate the effectiveness of this approach in line with ISO 31000-2018 principles. Which of the following represents the most crucial factor for the lead auditor to consider when assessing the suitability and efficacy of this quantitative methodology? Option A. The complexity of the statistical algorithms used within the simulation model and their adherence to advanced mathematical principles. Option B. The volume of historical data points utilized in the simulation, regardless of their relevance to current supply chain vulnerabilities. Option C. The degree to which the quantitative analysis can precisely predict the exact timing and magnitude of all potential supply chain disruptions. Option D. The extent to which the simulation model's outputs directly inform and improve the organization's risk treatment decisions and demonstrate alignment with its risk appetite. The correct answer is D. The extent to which the simulation model's outputs directly inform and improve the organization's risk treatment decisions and demonstrate alignment with its risk appetite. Explanation. The question concerns the application of quantitative risk analysis techniques within the framework of ISO 31000-2018. Specifically, probes the understanding of how a lead auditor would assess the suitability and effectiveness of such techniques when applied to a complex organizational context, such as a multinational technology firm. A lead auditor's role is to evaluate whether the organization's risk management processes, including the selection and application of risk analysis methods, are effective in achieving its objectives and comply with the principles and guidelines of ISO 31000. When considering quantitative techniques, the auditor must look beyond mere calculation and assess the underlying assumptions, data quality, model validity, and the practical relevance of the results to decision-making. The effectiveness of a quantitative technique is not solely determined by its mathematical rigor, but by its ability to provide meaningful insights that support informed risk treatment decisions and demonstrate a clear link between the analysis and the organization's risk appetite and tolerance. For instance, if an organization uses Monte Carlo simulations to estimate potential financial losses from cyber attacks, the auditor would examine the quality of the input probability distributions, the appropriateness of the simulation model for the specific threat landscape, and whether the output ranges provide actionable information for setting security budgets or contingency plans. The auditor would also consider if the chosen quantitative method aligns with the complexity and nature of the risks being analyzed, ensuring it does not oversimplify or misrepresent the reality of the situation. The goal is to ensure that the quantitative analysis is a robust tool that enhances understanding and facilitates better risk management, rather than a mere exercise in computation. Therefore, the most critical aspect for a lead auditor is the demonstrable contribution of the quantitative analysis to the overall effectiveness of the organization's risk management framework in achieving its stated objectives, considering the context and specific risks faced. Question 2. An organization operating in the highly regulated pharmaceutical sector is undergoing a risk management audit against ISO 31000-2018. The lead auditor is reviewing the process for defining risk criteria. During the audit, it is discovered that the organization has established generic risk tolerance levels for operational risks, but these levels are not explicitly linked to specific regulatory compliance requirements or the potential impact on patient safety, which is a primary organizational objective and a critical regulatory concern. The auditor notes that the risk assessment process relies on these generic levels to determine the significance of identified risks, including those related to product quality and supply chain integrity. Which of the following findings by the lead auditor would most accurately reflect a deficiency in the establishment of risk criteria according to ISO 31000-2018 principles? Option A. The organization has failed to document its risk appetite statement, which is a prerequisite for defining risk criteria according to the standard. Option B. The risk criteria established are not sufficiently tailored to the organization's specific context, including its regulatory obligations and critical objectives, leading to a potential disconnect between risk evaluation and actual impact. Option C. The risk criteria have not been reviewed or updated in the last 3 years, indicating a lack of ongoing monitoring and adaptation. Option D. The risk criteria are too subjective and rely heavily on expert judgment without any quantitative measures, making them difficult to audit. The correct answer is B. The risk criteria established are not sufficiently tailored to the organization's specific context, including its regulatory obligations and critical objectives, leading to a potential disconnect between risk evaluation and actual impact. Explanation: the establishment of risk criteria is a fundamental step in the risk management process as outlined by ISO 31000-2018. These criteria define the basis for evaluating the significance of risk and determining the level of risk that an organization is willing to accept or tolerate. They are derived from the organization's objectives, policies, legal and regulatory requirements, and stakeholder expectations. For a lead auditor, understanding how these criteria are set and applied is crucial for assessing the effectiveness of the organization's risk management framework. The criteria should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART, where applicable, and must be consistent with the organization's overall risk appetite and tolerance. Without clearly defined and appropriate criteria, the process of risk assessment and treatment decisions would lack a consistent and objective foundation, potentially leading to subjective evaluations and ineffective risk mitigation strategies. The auditor's role involves verifying that the organization has established and documented these criteria, and that they are used consistently throughout the risk management process, including during the review of risk assessment outcomes and the selection of risk treatments. This ensures that the organization's approach to risk is aligned with its strategic goals and its capacity to manage risk. Question 3. An enterprise embarking on the formal implementation of its risk management system in accordance with ISO 31000-2018 principles is confronted with a diverse array of potential threats across its operations. The organization possesses limited historical data pertaining to the frequency and severity of these threats, and there is a lack of consensus among subject matter experts regarding precise impact quantification. Given these circumstances, which risk assessment methodology would be the most prudent and effective initial approach to establish a foundational understanding and prioritize risks for further attention? Option A, semi-quantitative risk assessment. Option B, qualitative risk assessment. Option C, quantitative risk assessment. Option D, probabilistic risk assessment. Correct answer is B, qualitative risk assessment. Explanation: the core principle of risk assessment, as guided by ISO 31000-2018, involves understanding and analyzing the nature and level of risk. When an organization is in the early stages of establishing its risk management framework and faces a broad spectrum of potential threats with limited historical data or precise impact metrics, a qualitative risk assessment approach is most appropriate. This method relies on descriptive scales and expert judgment to categorize risks based on their likelihood and consequence. For instance, likelihood might be described as rare, unlikely, possible, likely, or almost certain, while consequences could be categorized as insignificant, minor, moderate, major, or catastrophic. This allows for a structured, albeit subjective, prioritization of risks without requiring the extensive data collection and complex modeling that quantitative methods demand. Semi-quantitative methods, while offering more granularity than purely qualitative approaches, still necessitate some level of numerical estimation, which may not be feasible or reliable in nascent risk management programs or for highly uncertain risks. Quantitative methods, which assign numerical values to likelihood and consequence, e.g., probabilities and monetary values, are best suited for situations where data is abundant and reliable, and a precise measurement of risk is required, such as in financial risk modeling or detailed safety engineering. Therefore, for an organization new to risk management and facing broad, ill-defined risks, starting with a qualitative assessment is the most practical and effective initial step to gain a foundational understanding and prioritize areas for more detailed analysis. Question 4. Assessment of the current risk management framework's effectiveness at Ethelred Solutions, a global logistics firm, reveals that while risk identification processes are robust, the translation of identified risks into actionable mitigation plans and their subsequent monitoring has been inconsistent across various operational units. The internal audit report also notes that the risk management policy, established 3 years ago, has not been formally reviewed against the evolving regulatory landscape, including recent amendments to international trade compliance laws. Considering ISO 31000-2018's principles for continual improvement of the framework, which of the following actions would be the most appropriate next step for Ethelred Solutions to enhance its framework's ongoing effectiveness and alignment? Option A. Conduct a series of workshops for all employees on basic risk management principles to ensure a foundational understanding across the organization. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the risk management policy and its alignment with current organizational objectives and the external regulatory environment, followed by targeted revisions to the risk treatment and monitoring processes based on audit findings and performance data. Option C. Immediately update the risk register with all newly identified risks and assign new risk owners without re-evaluating the existing treatment strategies. Option D. Focus solely on implementing a new risk management software solution to automate the identification and reporting of risks, assuming this will inherently improve the framework's effectiveness. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the risk management policy and its alignment with current organizational objectives and the external regulatory environment, followed by targeted revisions to the risk treatment and monitoring processes based on audit findings and performance data. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes the continual improvement of the risk management framework. This improvement is driven by learning from experience, feedback, and the outcomes of risk management activities. Clause 5.6. Continual improvement of the standard highlights that the framework should be adapted and enhanced based on its effectiveness in achieving the organization's objectives. A key aspect of this is the systematic review of the framework's performance. This review should consider whether the risk management processes are adequately integrated into organizational activities, if the risk appetite and tolerance levels remain appropriate, and if the communication and consultation processes are effective. The insights gained from audits, incident investigations, and performance monitoring are crucial inputs for identifying areas where the framework's design or implementation can be strengthened. For example, if an audit reveals a recurring gap in the consistent application of risk assessment criteria across different departments, this would necessitate a review and potential revision of the established risk assessment methodologies or training programs. Similarly, if the organization's strategic objectives shift, the risk management framework must evolve to ensure it effectively supports the new direction. This iterative process of review, learning, and adaptation is fundamental to ensuring the framework remains relevant and effective in managing risks to the organization's success. Question 5. During an audit of a multinational corporation's risk management system, an auditor observes that the organization has extensively documented its engagement with shareholders and senior management regarding strategic risks. However, the auditor notes a lack of formal engagement with local community representatives in regions where the company operates manufacturing facilities. Despite documented environmental incidents in the past that have led to public concern and regulatory scrutiny, what critical aspect of stakeholder identification and analysis, as guided by ISO 31000-2018 principles, does this observation most strongly suggest is being inadequately addressed by the corporation? Option A. The quantitative measurement of stakeholder influence using established financial metrics to prioritize engagement efforts. Option B. The reliance on formal contractual agreements as the sole basis for determining stakeholder relevance in risk management. Option C. The systematic identification of all relevant stakeholders, including those with indirect influence or external impact, irrespective of their formal relationship with the organization. Option D. The exclusive focus on stakeholders with a direct impact on the organization's financial performance and share price. The correct answer is C. The systematic identification of all relevant stakeholders, including those with indirect influence or external impact, irrespective of their formal relationship with the organization. Explanation: the fundamental principle of stakeholder identification and analysis within ISO 31000-2018 is to understand who is affected by, can affect, or perceives themselves to be affected by the organization's risk management activities. This involves moving beyond obvious internal parties to consider a broader spectrum of individuals, groups, and entities. The process requires careful consideration of their interests, expectations, and potential influence on the effectiveness of risk management. An auditor must assess whether the organization has a systematic and comprehensive approach to identifying all relevant stakeholders, not just those with direct reporting lines or obvious financial stakes. This includes considering regulatory bodies, industry associations, community groups, and even competitors, depending on the context and the nature of the risks being managed. The analysis should then determine the level of engagement required for each stakeholder, their risk appetite, and how their perspectives can inform the risk management process, including the establishment of the risk management framework and the treatment of risks. A robust identification process will ensure that the risk management system is aligned with organizational objectives and societal expectations, and that all significant influences are acknowledged and addressed. Question 6. During an audit of a multinational logistics firm's risk management system, a lead auditor identifies that the organization's risk register for operational disruptions relies heavily on data from a decade ago, with minimal updates reflecting recent advancements in autonomous shipping technology and emerging cybersecurity threats impacting global trade routes. The auditor also notes that the firm's internal risk appetite statement, which guides the acceptance of residual risk, has not been formally reviewed or revised in alignment with these evolving external factors and the company's strategic pivot towards digital integration. What fundamental aspect of ISO 31000-2018's risk management principles is most significantly compromised by these findings? Option A. The organization's focus on operational risks to the exclusion of strategic and financial risks demonstrates a failure to consider all relevant risk categories. Option B. The failure to conduct regular internal audits and management reviews contradicts the standards requirements for continuous improvement of the risk management framework. Option C. The organization's reliance on outdated and insufficient data, coupled with an unaligned risk appetite, directly undermines the principle of using the best available information for informed decision-making. Option D. The lack of external stakeholder consultation in the risk assessment process indicates a disregard for the comprehensive nature of risk management as defined by the standard. The correct answer is C. The organization's reliance on outdated and insufficient data, coupled with an unaligned risk appetite, directly undermines the principle of using the best available information for informed decision-making. Explanation. The core principle of using the best available information in risk management, as espoused by ISO 31000-2018, involves a systematic approach to gathering, analyzing, and utilizing relevant data. This information should be timely, accurate, and sufficient to support informed decision-making throughout the risk management process, from establishing the context to monitoring and review. The standard emphasizes that the quality and relevance of information directly impact the effectiveness of risk assessment and the subsequent treatment decisions. A lead auditor must assess whether the organization has established processes to identify, access, and evaluate the suitability of information sources. This includes considering both internal data, e.g., incident reports, operational data, financial records, and external data, e.g., market trends, regulatory changes, industry benchmarks, expert opinions. The auditor's role is to verify that the organization does not rely on outdated, incomplete, or biased information. For instance, if an organization is assessing the risk of supply chain disruption due to geopolitical instability, it should be using current intelligence reports, economic forecasts, and supplier performance data, rather than relying solely on historical assumptions. The auditor would look for evidence of how the organization validates the reliability and relevance of this information, and how it is integrated into the risk register and treatment plans. This ensures that risk management activities are grounded in reality and contribute to achieving the organization's objectives. The process of obtaining and using the best available information is iterative, meaning it should be continuously reviewed and updated as new information becomes available or as the context changes. Question 7. When conducting an audit of an organization's risk management system against ISO 31000-2018, what is the primary focus for a lead auditor when assessing the effectiveness of defined risk management accountabilities across different organizational functions and levels? Option A. Verification that the organization's documented risk management policy explicitly assigns ultimate oversight and responsibility for risk management to the governing body, with clear delegation of implementation responsibilities to management, and that these assignments are communicated and understood by relevant personnel. Option B. Confirmation that a dedicated risk management committee exists and has been established with terms of reference that clearly outline its risk oversight functions, irrespective of whether these functions align with the broader accountability structure. Option C. Review of the internal audit reports from the past 3 years to identify any instances where risk management responsibilities were not met, assuming that past noncompliance indicates a systemic issue with current accountabilities. Option D. Examination of the risk register to ensure that all identified risks have a single designated risk owner, regardless of the complexity or cross-functional nature of the risk, to simplify reporting lines. The correct answer is A. Verification that the organization's documented risk management policy explicitly assigns ultimate oversight and responsibility for risk management to the governing body, with clear delegation of implementation responsibilities to management, and that these assignments are communicated and understood by relevant personnel. Explanation: ISO 31000, 2018 emphasizes that risk management is an integral part of an organization's governance and leadership. It mandates that accountability for risk management activities must be clearly defined and communicated throughout the organization. This means that individuals at various levels, from the highest governing body down to operational personnel, should understand their roles and responsibilities concerning risk management. The standard highlights that the governing body is ultimately accountable for ensuring that risk management is integrated into the organization's objectives and activities. Management is responsible for implementing the risk management framework and processes, while employees at all levels are responsible for managing risks within their own areas of operation. The effectiveness of risk management relies heavily on these clearly established accountabilities, ensuring that risk is considered in decision-making and that risk management activities are performed consistently and effectively. This clarity prevents ambiguity and ensures that all relevant parties are engaged in the risk management process, fostering a strong risk culture. Question 8. When assessing the ongoing suitability and effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework against the principles outlined in ISO 31000, 2018, which of the following actions by a lead auditor would most directly indicate a thorough review of the framework's monitoring and review mechanisms? Option A. Examining the completeness of the risk register and ensuring all identified risks have assigned owners. Option B. Evaluating the organization's communication strategy for disseminating risk management awareness throughout all levels of the organization. Option C. Confirming that the organization has conducted at least one internal audit of its risk management processes in the last fiscal year. Option D. Verifying that documented procedures exist for regularly reviewing the risk management policy and objectives in light of changes in the organization's internal and external context. The correct answer is D. Verifying that documented procedures exist for regularly reviewing the risk management policy and objectives in light of changes in the organization's internal and external context. Explanation: the effectiveness of a risk management framework is not a static measure, but requires ongoing scrutiny and adaptation. ISO 31000, 2018 emphasizes that monitoring and review are integral to ensuring the framework remains relevant, suitable, and capable of achieving its intended outcomes. This involves assessing whether the established risk management processes are being followed, if the risk appetite and tolerance levels are still appropriate given changes in the internal and external context, and if the controls implemented are performing as expected. A critical aspect of this review is to identify any deviations from the intended design or performance, and to understand the root causes of these deviations. Furthermore, the review process should gather information on the performance of the framework itself, including its integration with other organizational processes and its contribution to achieving objectives. This continuous feedback loop allows for informed decisions regarding necessary adjustments to the framework's components, such as policy, objectives, roles and responsibilities, and the risk management processes themselves. The ultimate goal is to enhance the organization's ability to manage risk effectively and achieve its strategic goals. Question 9. During an audit of a multinational logistics firm's enterprise-wide risk management framework, an auditor observes that disruptions in a key supplier's operations in Southeast Asia have consistently led to increased transit times and higher freight costs for the firm's European distribution network, even though these two operational areas are managed by separate regional teams. The auditor needs to assess the effectiveness of the firm's risk identification and analysis processes in capturing such interdependencies. Which risk assessment technique would be most effective for the auditor to recommend for the firm to systematically identify and quantify these interconnected risk impacts? Option A, dependency analysis. Option B, risk mapping. Option C, scenario analysis. Option D, correlation analysis. The correct answer is A, dependency analysis. Explanation. The question probes the auditor's ability to identify the most appropriate method for assessing the interconnectedness of risks within an organization, specifically focusing on how changes in one risk event might impact others. Dependency analysis is a systematic process used to understand and map the relationships between different risks, identifying how the occurrence or change in severity of one risk can trigger, exacerbate, or mitigate another. This is crucial for a holistic risk assessment, especially when dealing with complex operational environments or systemic risks. Correlation analysis, while related, typically focuses on statistical relationships between variables and might not fully capture the causal or conditional dependencies inherent in risk interrelationships. Scenario analysis is a broader technique that can incorporate dependencies, but is not solely focused on mapping them. Risk mapping is a visualization tool that can represent dependencies, but is the output of the analysis rather than the method itself. Therefore, dependency analysis directly addresses the core of understanding how risks are linked and influence each other, which is a critical aspect of a lead auditor's role in evaluating the effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework. The ISO 31000-2018 standard emphasizes understanding the context and interdependencies of risks as part of the risk assessment process. Question 10. When conducting an audit of an organization's risk management framework against ISO 31000-2018, what specific aspect of integration would a lead auditor prioritize to determine the maturity and effectiveness of its embedding within core organizational processes, considering the principles of enterprise risk management? Option A, the frequency of risk management training sessions conducted for employees, without specific evaluation of their application in daily work. Option B, the organization's adherence to specific regulatory requirements for risk reporting and the presence of a dedicated risk management policy document. Option C, the extent to which risk considerations are demonstrably embedded in strategic decision-making, operational planning, and performance management activities across all relevant business units. Option D, the existence of a separate risk management department with clearly defined responsibilities, irrespective of its interaction with other organizational functions. The correct answer is C, the extent to which risk considerations are demonstrably embedded in strategic decision-making, operational planning, and performance management activities across all relevant business units. Explanation. The question probes the lead auditor's understanding of how risk management, as guided by ISO 31000-2018, should be embedded within an organization's existing processes rather than being a standalone activity. Effective integration means that risk management principles are inherent in decision-making, planning, and operational activities across the organization. This includes ensuring that risk considerations are a natural part of strategic planning, project management, performance reviews, and even day-to-day operational tasks. The lead auditor would look for evidence that risk management is not merely a compliance exercise, but a fundamental aspect of how the organization functions and achieves its objectives. This involves assessing whether risk appetite and tolerance are communicated and applied in various business units, whether risk assessments inform resource allocation, and whether risk information is used to improve processes and outcomes. The goal is to move beyond a check-the-box approach to a pervasive culture where risk awareness and management are part of the organizational DNA. The other options represent less integrated or less effective approaches. Focusing solely on compliance with specific regulations without considering broader organizational objectives is insufficient. Treating risk management as a separate departmental function, detached from core business activities, hinders its effectiveness. Similarly, Relying exclusively on external consultants without building internal capability and integrating the process into daily operations leads to a superficial and unsustainable risk management system. Question 11. During an audit of a multinational logistics firm, a lead auditor is reviewing the organization's risk register. The auditor encounters an entry describing a potential disruption to a critical supply chain route due to unforeseen geopolitical instability in a key transit region. This instability could lead to significant delays, increased transportation costs, and potential contract breaches with major clients. The auditor needs to accurately categorize the fundamental characteristics of this identified risk to assess the adequacy of the firm's risk management practices. What combination best describes the source, area, nature, and type of this risk, respectively, as per the principles of ISO 31000-2018? Option A. Political factors, global logistics network, financial loss and reputational damage, strategic risk. Option B. Geopolitical instability, international shipping routes, operational disruption and cost escalation, supply chain risk. Option C. Unforeseen circumstances, transit hubs, economic volatility and service failure, financial risk. Option D. External events, transportation infrastructure, compliance and contractual obligations, market risk. The correct answer is B. Geopolitical instability, international shipping routes, operational disruption and cost escalation, supply chain risk. Explanation. ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. This effect can be positive or negative. When auditing an organization's risk management framework, a lead auditor must be able to discern the fundamental characteristics of identified risks to assess the effectiveness of the controls and treatments applied. The source of a risk refers to the origin or cause that gives rise to the risk event. The area of a risk pertains to the specific part of the organization, its processes, systems, or activities that are exposed to the risk. The nature of the risk describes its inherent characteristics, such as whether it is strategic, operational, financial, or compliance-related. Finally, the type of risk categorizes it based on its underlying cause or impact. For instance, market risk, credit risk, or reputational risk. Understanding these distinctions is crucial for an auditor to evaluate the comprehensiveness of the risk register and the appropriateness of the risk response strategies. For example, a risk originating from a new competitor source in the European market area, leading to a potential decline in market share, nature, and categorized as a strategic market risk, type, require different audit considerations than a risk stemming from a software malfunction, source, in the IT department area, resulting in data loss nature, and classified as an operational IT risk type. The auditor's objective is to verify that the organization has systematically identified and analyzed these attributes for all significant risks, ensuring that the risk management process is robust and aligned with organizational objectives. Question 12. During an audit of a mid-sized technology firm specializing in cloud-based software solutions, the lead auditor observes that the organization's risk management framework, while comprehensive, appears to be overly rigid and complex for its operational scale and agility. The documented procedures for risk identification and assessment involve multiple layers of approval and extensive documentation for even minor operational risks. The firm's risk appetite statement is generic and does not clearly differentiate acceptable risk levels for innovation versus operational stability. Considering the principles of customization and proportionality as espoused in ISO 31000-2018, what would be the lead auditor's primary concern regarding the firm's risk management system? Option A. The organization has failed to establish any formal risk management policy, indicating a complete absence of risk governance. Option B. The risk assessment methodology does not incorporate quantitative analysis, which is a mandatory requirement for all organizations under ISO 31000-2018. Option C. The firm's reliance on cloud-based software solutions for risk management activities inherently compromises data security and integrity, irrespective of the framework's design. Option D. The risk management framework's complexity and lack of tailored application may hinder agility and efficient decision-making, potentially failing to align with the organization's dynamic technological environment and strategic goals. The correct answer is D. The risk management framework's complexity and lack of tailored application may hinder agility and efficient decision-making, potentially failing to align with the organization's dynamic technological environment and strategic goals. Explanation: the principle of customization and proportionality in ISO 31000/2018 dictates that the risk management framework and processes should be tailored to the organization's external and internal context, including its objectives, stakeholders, size, activities, and complexity. Proportionality ensures that the level of effort, resources, and detail applied to risk management activities is commensurate with the potential impact and likelihood of the risks being managed, as well as the organization's overall risk appetite. A lead auditor must assess whether the organization has effectively integrated these principles into its risk management system. This involves examining how the organization identifies, analyzes, evaluates, treats, monitors, and communicates risks, ensuring that the approach is not overly bureaucratic or simplistic, but rather appropriate for the specific circumstances. For instance, a small, agile startup will have a different risk management approach than a large, multinational corporation operating in a highly regulated industry. The lead auditor would look for evidence that the organization has considered its specific context when designing its risk management policies, procedures, and tools, and that the risk management activities are aligned with its strategic objectives and operational realities. This involves verifying that the organization's risk appetite statement is clearly defined, and that risk management decisions are made in consideration of this appetite. The effectiveness of the risk management system is judged by its ability to contribute to the achievement of objectives, not by its adherence to a rigid, one-size-fits-all model. Therefore, the lead auditor's focus should be on the suitability and effectiveness of the customized approach in relation to the organization's unique context and risk profile. Question 13. Consider an audit of a nascent quantum computing research firm operating under stringent national security regulations and rapidly evolving intellectual property laws. The firm has minimal historical operational data due to its recent establishment and the highly specialized nature of its work. Which risk identification method would be most effective for a lead auditor to employ to uncover potential vulnerabilities in the firm's research processes, data security, and compliance with emerging regulations? Option A. Analysis of the firm's limited internal audit reports from the past 2 years, supplemented by a review of general cybersecurity best practices applicable to any technology company. Option B. Facilitated brainstorming sessions with the research and development teams, focusing on immediate operational challenges and known technological limitations. Option C. Comprehensive review of industry standard checklists for technology startups, cross-reference with publicly available incident reports from similar, albeit less advanced, research entities. Option D. Structured expert judgment utilizing scenario-based workshops and Delphi techniques to probe potential future disruptions and regulatory noncompliance. The correct answer is D. Structured expert judgment utilizing scenario-based workshops and Delphi techniques to probe potential future disruptions and regulatory noncompliance. Explanation: the question asks about the most appropriate method for identifying risks in a highly regulated and complex environment, where historical data might be incomplete or misleading due to frequent regulatory changes. ISO 31000/2018 emphasizes that the selection of risk identification method should be tailored to the context of the organization and the specific risks being considered. While brainstorming is useful for generating a broad range of ideas, it can be subjective and may miss subtle risks. Checklists are effective for known risks and compliance issues, but might not uncover novel or emerging threats. Historical data, while valuable, is often insufficient in rapidly evolving sectors like advanced biotechnology or quantum computing, where past events may not be predictive of future risks. Expert judgment, often facilitated through structured techniques like Delphi or scenario analysis, allows for the exploration of potential future events and the identification of risks that are not readily apparent from past occurrences or simple brainstorming. In a context where regulatory shifts are frequent and their impact is profound, engaging subject matter experts who understand these dynamics is crucial for identifying potential compliance failures, operational disruptions, or strategic misalignments. Therefore, a method that leverages deep expertise and forward-looking analysis is paramount. Question 14. During an audit of an organization's risk management framework, A lead auditor is reviewing the effectiveness of a newly implemented risk mitigation strategy for cyber threats. The strategy involves enhanced employee training and a new firewall system. The auditor finds that while training completion records exist and the firewall is installed, there is no quantifiable data demonstrating a reduction in the frequency or impact of cyber incidents since its implementation. The organization's risk register indicates the mitigation is partially effective. What is the most appropriate audit conclusion regarding the evidence-based effectiveness of this mitigation strategy? Option A. The mitigation strategy is ineffective as the organization has not yet achieved a significant reduction in cyber incidents. Option B. The mitigation strategy's effectiveness cannot be conclusively determined due to insufficient verifiable data demonstrating a reduction in cyber incidents. Option C. The mitigation strategy is partially effective, aligning with the risk register, and no further evidence is required for this aspect of the audit. Option D. The mitigation strategy is effective because the training has been completed and the firewall is operational. Correct answer is B. The mitigation strategy's effectiveness cannot be conclusively determined due to insufficient verifiable data demonstrating a reduction in cyber incidents. Explanation: the fundamental principle of an evidence-based approach in risk management auditing, as espoused by ISO 31000-2018, is the reliance on verifiable information to support conclusions and recommendations. This means auditors must gather objective data through various means, such as interviews, document reviews, observations, and performance metrics. The quality and relevance of this evidence directly influence the validity of the audit findings. For instance, an auditor assessing the effectiveness of a risk treatment plan would seek evidence of the plan's implementation and its impact on the identified risks. This could include updated process documentation, training records, incident reports showing a reduction in occurrences, or performance data demonstrating improved outcomes. The absence of such concrete evidence would lead to an inconclusive finding, or a finding that the risk treatment is not demonstrably effective, requiring further investigation or the establishment of appropriate controls to generate the necessary data. The auditor's role is to critically evaluate the collected evidence against the established risk management framework and objectives. Question 15. Consider an audit of a multinational logistics company's risk management framework, which is designed to comply with ISO 31000-2018. The company operates in diverse regulatory environments, including strict data privacy laws in the European Union and varying import/export regulations in several Asian countries. The auditor has reviewed the documented risk management policy and procedures, which appear comprehensive. However, during interviews, several mid-level managers express uncertainty about how to escalate emerging geopolitical risks that could impact supply chain stability. Furthermore, the auditor observes that the risk register, while populated, seems to lack specific quantitative data for certain high-impact, low-probability events, and the risk treatment plans are often generic. What is the most critical manifestation of the auditor's failure to exercise due professional care in this scenario? Option A. Recommending a complete overhaul of the risk management policy due to the perceived lack of detail in the risk treatment plans. Option B. Accepting the documented risk management procedures as sufficient evidence of effectiveness without probing the practical application and understanding by management. Option C. Focusing solely on the quantitative data in the risk register and overlooking the qualitative assessment of emerging geopolitical risks. Option D. Concluding that the organization's risk appetite statement is inadequate without first assessing its alignment with the company's strategic objectives. Correct answer is B. Accepting the documented risk management procedures as sufficient evidence of effectiveness without probing the practical application and understanding by management. Explanation: the auditor's duty of due professional care in the context of ISO 31000-2018 requires a diligent and objective approach to the audit process. This involves maintaining skepticism, exercising sound judgment, and acting with competence and integrity. When reviewing the effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework, an auditor must go beyond simply verifying the existence of documented procedures. Due professional care mandates a thorough examination of how these procedures are actually implemented and how they contribute to achieving the organization's objectives, considering the specific context and the nature of the risks faced. This includes assessing whether the risk management process is integrated into the organization's activities, whether risk appetite and tolerance are clearly defined and applied, and whether risk information is communicated effectively. The auditor must be prepared to challenge assumptions, seek corroborating evidence, and form conclusions based on a comprehensive understanding of the evidence gathered, rather than relying on superficial compliance. This meticulous approach ensures that the audit provides valuable insights into the true effectiveness of the risk management system and its alignment with the organization's strategic goals, thereby fulfilling the auditor's professional responsibility. Question 16. During an audit of a multinational corporation's risk management framework, an auditor discovers significant control deficiencies in the cybersecurity risk area, which have led to several minor data breaches. However, the corporation has implemented an exceptionally robust supply chain risk management program that has successfully mitigated several potentially disruptive events. The audit report is being finalized. Which approach best exemplifies the principle of fair presentation in this context? Option A. Recommending immediate suspension of all risk management activities until the cybersecurity issues are fully resolved, thereby presenting a picture of critical failure. Option B. Emphasizing the successful supply chain risk management program to demonstrate the organization's overall risk management competence, with only a cursory mention of the cybersecurity issues. Option C. Detailing the cybersecurity control weaknesses and their impact, alongside a thorough description of the successful supply chain risk management initiatives and their benefits. Option D. Focusing the report primarily on the cybersecurity deficiencies, as these represent a material risk to the organization, while only briefly mentioning the supply chain successes. The correct answer is C. Detailing the cybersecurity control weaknesses and their impact, alongside a thorough description of the successful supply chain risk management initiatives and their benefits. Explanation. The principle of fair presentation in auditing, particularly concerning risk management, as per ISO 31000-2018, mandates that the audit report accurately reflects the findings of the audit. This includes presenting both positive and negative aspects of the organization's risk management system in a balanced and objective manner. It requires the auditor to ensure that the information conveyed is truthful, unbiased, and complete, allowing stakeholders to form an informed judgment. A fair presentation means that the report should not selectively highlight only areas of weakness or only areas of strength, nor should it misrepresent the extent or impact of identified risks or controls. The auditor must also ensure that the language used is clear, concise, and avoids ambiguity. Furthermore, it implies that any conclusions or recommendations are directly supported by the audit evidence gathered, and that the overall picture presented is representative of the organization's risk management framework's effectiveness and efficiency. This principle is fundamental to the credibility and value of the audit process. Question 17. An organization is undergoing an ISO 31000-2018 risk management audit. The lead auditor is reviewing the effectiveness of resource allocation for risk management activities. The organization's risk management framework is comprehensive, covering strategic, operational, and compliance risks, and is integrated across all major business units. The audit reveals that while a dedicated budget exists, it is primarily allocated to the central risk management function, with limited direct funding for risk management activities within individual departments. Furthermore, the IT infrastructure supporting risk data collection and analysis is outdated and insufficient for the volume and complexity of data generated. Considering the principles of ISO 31000-2018, what is the most critical deficiency in the organization's resource allocation for risk management? Option A. The absence of a clearly defined risk management policy that explicitly details resource allocation guidelines for all organizational levels. Option B. Over-reliance on the central risk management function, which may lead to a lack of ownership and engagement from business unit managers in risk mitigation efforts. Option C. The primary allocation of resources to compliance-related risks, potentially neglecting other significant risk categories such as strategic or reputational risks. Option D. Insufficient allocation of direct financial and technological resources to departmental-level risk management activities, hindering effective risk treatment and monitoring at the operational front lines. Correct answer is D. insufficient allocation of direct financial and technological resources to departmental-level risk management activities, hindering effective risk treatment and monitoring at the operational front lines. Explanation: ISO 31000, 2018 emphasizes that risk management is an integral part of an organization's governance and leadership. The standard, particularly in Clause 5.3 integration into organizational processes, and Clause 7.1 resources, highlights that effective risk management requires adequate resources. These resources encompass human resources, competent personnel, financial resources, and technological resources. The allocation of these resources must be aligned with the organization's risk appetite, objectives, and the complexity of its risk management activities. A lead auditor's role is to assess whether the organization has established and maintains the necessary resources to manage risks effectively, considering the scope and context of its operations. This involves evaluating if the allocated resources are sufficient to implement the risk management framework, conduct risk assessments, apply risk treatments, monitor risks, and continually improve the process. It is not about simply assigning a budget figure, but rather ensuring that the allocation enables the practical and effective execution of risk management activities across all relevant levels and functions. The effectiveness of resource allocation is judged by its contribution to achieving the organization's risk management objectives, and by extension, its overall strategic goals. Question 18. When auditing an organization's risk management framework for compliance with ISO 31000, 2018, what is the primary focus for a lead auditor when evaluating the effectiveness of the probability and impact assessment process for strategic risks? Option A. Confirming that the organization utilizes the most sophisticated statistical modeling techniques available to quantify the probability and impact of all identified strategic risks. Option B. Checking if the organization has conducted at least 3 separate workshops with external consultants to validate the probability and impact assessments for each strategic risk. Option C. Verifying that the organization has established and consistently applied clear, context-specific criteria for defining probability and impact levels, ensuring these align with the organization's strategic objectives and risk appetite. Option D. Ensuring that all identified strategic risks are assigned a numerical probability score between 0 and 1, and a quantifiable impact score on a scale of 1 to 10, irrespective of the organization's defined criteria. The correct answer is C. Verifying that the organization has established and consistently applied clear, context-specific criteria for defining probability and impact levels, ensuring these align with the organization's strategic objectives and risk appetite. Explanation: the core of effective risk assessment under ISO 31000, 2018 lies in the systematic evaluation of both the likelihood of a risk event occurring and the potential impact it could have on the organization's objectives. This is not a purely subjective exercise. It requires a structured approach that considers various factors. When assessing likelihood, an auditor would examine historical data, expert judgment, industry benchmarks, and the effectiveness of existing controls. For impact, the auditor would consider the consequences across multiple dimensions, such as financial loss, reputational damage, operational disruption, legal or regulatory noncompliance, and harm to stakeholders. The combination of these assessments, often visualized in a risk matrix, helps prioritize risks for treatment. A key aspect for a lead auditor is to verify that the organization has established clear, consistent, and appropriate criteria for defining likelihood and impact levels, and that these criteria are applied uniformly across different risk categories. This ensures that the risk appetite and tolerance set by the organization are effectively translated into the risk assessment process. The auditor's role is to confirm that the organization's methodology for probability and impact assessment is robust, well documented, and demonstrably leads to a reliable understanding of the risk landscape relative to its objectives. This includes scrutinizing how the organization differentiates between different levels of likelihood and impact, ensuring these distinctions are meaningful and actionable for decision-making. Question 19. During an audit of a global financial institution's risk management system, an auditor observes that while risk registers are meticulously maintained and risk assessments are performed according to documented procedures, there is a noticeable disconnect between the risk management function and operational decision-making units. Senior management expresses frustration that risk insights are not readily integrated into strategic planning, and departmental heads feel that risk management recommendations are often perceived as overly cautious or irrelevant to their daily operations. What critical aspect of ISO 31000 2018's communication and consultation requirements is likely being inadequately addressed in this scenario? Option A. Implementing a mandatory risk management training program for all employees, regardless of their role or involvement in risk activities. Option B. Conducting annual stakeholder satisfaction surveys specifically focused on the perceived effectiveness of the risk management function's communication. Option C. Establishing a formal risk communication policy that dictates the frequency and format of all risk-related reporting. Option D. Ensuring that risk information is communicated and considered at all relevant organizational levels and integrated into decision-making processes. Correct answer is D. Ensuring that risk information is communicated and considered at all relevant organizational levels and integrated into decision-making processes. Explanation: the fundamental purpose of communication and consultation within a risk management framework, as outlined by ISO 31000-2018, is to ensure that all relevant stakeholders are informed, their perspectives are considered, and that the risk management process is integrated into decision-making and organizational activities. Effective communication ensures that risk information is understood, and consultation facilitates the gathering of diverse insights and the development of shared understanding and commitment to risk treatment actions. This two-way process is not merely about disseminating information. It is about engaging stakeholders in a dialogue to build trust, manage expectation, and enhance the overall effectiveness and acceptance of the risk management system. It supports the continual improvement of risk management by providing feedback and identifying new or evolving risks and control measures. The standard emphasizes that communication and consultation should be ongoing, iterative, and tailored to the specific needs of the organization and its context. This includes communicating risk appetite, risk criteria, and the outcomes of risk assessments and treatments to appropriate parties. Question 20. During an audit of a mid-sized manufacturing firm's risk management framework, the lead auditor observes that the organization has primarily employed descriptive rating scales and expert judgment to evaluate the potential impact and likelihood of identified operational disruptions. The firm lacks extensive historical data for many emerging risks, and the management team requires a swift initial prioritization of potential threats to inform immediate resource allocation for mitigation efforts. Which risk assessment technique is most demonstrably aligned with the firm's current situation and immediate needs as described by ISO 31000-2018 principles? Option A. Quantitative risk assessment. Option B. Semi-quantitative risk assessment with Monte Carlo simulation. Option C. Scenario-based quantitative modeling. Option D. Qualitative risk assessment. Correct answer is D. Qualitative risk assessment. Explanation: the core of effective risk assessment under ISO 31000-2018 lies in selecting appropriate techniques that align with the organization's context, objectives, and available resources. Qualitative risk assessment relies on descriptive scales and expert judgment to determine the likelihood and consequence of risks. Semi-quantitative approaches introduce numerical scales or scoring systems to rank risks, providing a more structured comparison than purely qualitative methods, but without the detailed data requirements of quantitative analysis. Quantitative risk assessment, conversely, uses numerical data and statistical models to assign probabilities and financial or operational impacts, offering a precise measure of risk exposure. When an organization has limited historical data or needs to quickly identify and prioritize a broad range of potential risks, qualitative methods are often the most practical starting point. They are particularly useful for exploring uncertainties where precise measurement is not feasible or necessary for initial decision-making. This approach allows for a rapid and comprehensive overview of the risk landscape, enabling the organization to focus resources on the most significant threats and opportunities as identified through expert consensus and descriptive analysis. The selection of a technique should always consider the purpose of the assessment, the availability of data, required level of precision, and the competencies of the personnel involved. A lead auditor must be able to discern when a particular technique is being used inappropriately, or when a more robust method is warranted based on the organization's risk appetite and the criticality of the processes being assessed. The goal is to ensure that the risk assessment provides meaningful input for risk treatment decisions and the overall effectiveness of the risk management framework. Question 21. A lead auditor is evaluating the effectiveness of an organization's risk management framework in accordance with ISO 31000-2018. The organization has established clear risk management objectives, but the auditor notes a lack of structured processes for systematically reviewing the framework's performance and identifying areas for enhancement. Which of the following approaches would best enable the lead auditor to assess the organization's commitment to the continual improvement of its risk management framework? Option A. Assessing the level of senior management engagement in risk management discussions during board meetings. Option B. Reviewing documented procedures for periodic evaluation of the framework's performance against objectives and evidence of implemented improvements. Option C. Examining the organization's compliance with specific regulatory requirements related to risk reporting. Option D. Verifying the existence of a comprehensive risk register that details all identified risks and their mitigation strategies. The correct answer is B. Reviewing documented procedures for periodic evaluation of the framework's performance against objectives and evidence of implemented improvements. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes the continual improvement of the risk management framework, which is a fundamental aspect of establishing and maintaining an effective risk management system. The standard posits that the framework's effectiveness is not static, but requires ongoing evaluation and enhancement. This process involves understanding the organization's context, which includes its objectives, stakeholders, and the external and internal environments. A lead auditor's role is to assess whether the organization has mechanisms in place to monitor the performance of its risk management framework and to identify opportunities for improvement. Clause 5.6 of ISO 31000-2018, Continual Improvement, specifically addresses this by stating that the organization should continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the risk management framework. This involves learning from experience, feedback, and the outcomes of risk management activities. Therefore, the most effective approach for a lead auditor to assess this is by examining the organization's documented processes for reviewing the framework's performance against its objectives and for implementing changes based on this review. This includes looking for evidence of periodic assessments, internal audits focused on the framework's effectiveness, management reviews, and the integration of lessons learned from risk events or near misses into framework adjustments. The goal is to ensure the framework remains aligned with the organization's evolving needs and strategic direction. Question 22. When initiating an audit of an organization's risk management framework, a lead auditor must meticulously establish clear audit objectives, considering the principles outlined in ISO 31000-2018 and the need for a comprehensive, context-aware approach. What is the most critical factor that should guide the formulation of these objectives? Option A. The perceived level of risk within the organization, as informally assessed by senior management without formal documentation or data. Option B. The personal preferences of the audit team leader regarding specific risk management techniques or control frameworks to be evaluated. Option C. Alignment with the organization's stated risk appetite, strategic objectives, and the specific regulatory or legal compliance requirements pertinent to its operational environment. Option D. A broad mandate to examine all aspects of the risk management process without specific focus, allowing for maximum flexibility during the audit fieldwork. The correct answer is C. Alignment with the organization's stated risk appetite, strategic objectives, and the specific regulatory or legal compliance requirements pertinent to its operational environment. Explanation: the establishment of audit objectives is a foundational step in the risk management auditing process, directly influencing the scope, methodology, and desired outcomes of the audit. ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that the objectives should be clearly defined, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART, aligning with the organization's overall risk management framework and specific audit needs. For a lead auditor, understanding the organizational context, including its risk appetite, strategic goals, and the specific regulatory environment, such as the General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR), or industry-specific regulations like those from the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA), is paramount. These contextual elements inform the selection of audit criteria, the identification of key risk areas to be examined, and the determination of the level of assurance required. For instance, if an organization operates in a highly regulated sector with stringent data privacy requirements, the audit objectives would likely focus on the effectiveness of controls related to data protection and compliance with relevant legislation. The objectives must also consider the intended users of the audit report and their specific information needs. A robust set of audit objectives provides direction and a benchmark against which the audit's success and findings can be evaluated. The process of defining these objectives involves consultation with stakeholders, a review of previous audit findings, and an assessment of the current risk landscape. This ensures that the audit is targeted, efficient, and delivers valuable insights for improving the organization's risk management practices. Question 23. When auditing an organization's risk management framework against ISO 31000-2018, which of the following findings would most strongly indicate a deficiency in the framework's integration with the organization's governance and strategic objectives, as stipulated in Clause 4.2 of the standard? Option A. The organization has appointed a Chief Risk Officer, CRO, who reports directly to the board and is responsible for overseeing the risk management framework. Option B. An internal audit function has been established to periodically review the effectiveness of risk management processes and controls. Option C. Risk management policies and procedures are documented but primarily reside within a dedicated risk management department, with limited evidence of their application in strategic planning meetings or operational decision-making at departmental levels. Option D. The organization has established a comprehensive risk register that is regularly updated with identified risks, their potential impacts, and mitigation strategies. The correct answer is C. Risk management policies and procedures are documented but primarily reside within a dedicated risk management department, with limited evidence of their application in strategic planning meetings or operational decision-making at departmental levels. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that the framework for risk management should be integrated into an organization's governance, strategy, planning, operations, and decision-making processes. This integration ensures that risk management is not a standalone activity, but a fundamental part of how the organization functions and achieves its objectives. Clause 4.2 of the standard, integration, highlights the importance of embedding risk management throughout the organization. This involves ensuring that the risk management framework supports the achievement of objectives, and that risk management principles are applied consistently across all activities. A key aspect of this integration is the role of leadership and commitment, as outlined in Clause 4.2. 1. Leadership and commitment. Top management must demonstrate leadership by ensuring that the risk management framework is established, implemented, maintained, and continually improved. This includes allocating appropriate resources, fostering a risk-aware culture, and ensuring that risk management is considered in strategic decisions. The effectiveness of the framework is directly linked to how well it is embedded within the organization's existing structures and processes, rather than being a separate or add-on function. This holistic approach ensures that risk management contributes to the organization's overall performance and resilience. Question 24. When developing an audit program for an organization's risk management system, which of the following principles should most heavily influence the scheduling and prioritization of specific audit activities to ensure comprehensive coverage and alignment with strategic objectives, particularly in a regulated environment like that governed by the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR? Option A. Focusing audits exclusively on operational risks that have historically resulted in the most significant financial losses, without regard for emerging strategic or compliance-related risks. Option B. Conducting audits only when a significant risk event has already occurred, as a reactive measure to identify failures in the existing risk management processes. Option C. Prioritizing audits based on the criticality of risks to the organization's strategic objectives and the maturity of the risk management framework, while considering specific regulatory compliance requirements such as GDPR data protection controls. Option D. Scheduling audits solely based on the perceived ease of execution and the availability of internal audit resources, irrespective of the risk profile or regulatory mandates. The correct answer is C. prioritizing audits based on the criticality of risks to the organization's strategic objectives and the maturity of the risk management framework, while considering specific regulatory compliance requirements such as GDPR data protection controls. Explanation: the scheduling of risk management audits under ISO 31000-2018 requires a systematic approach that considers various influencing factors to ensure effectiveness and efficiency. A key aspect is the integration of risk management activities into the organization's overall audit program. This involves identifying critical areas of the organization's operations and strategic objectives that are most exposed to risks. The frequency and scope of audits are determined by the organization's risk appetite, the maturity of its risk management framework, the significance of identified risks, and any specific regulatory or compliance requirements. For instance, a high-risk sector like financial services, subject to stringent regulations such as those from the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, or the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, would necessitate more frequent and in-depth audits of its risk management processes compared to a low-risk industry. The audit schedule should also be dynamic, allowing for adjustments based on changes in the risk landscape, the results of previous audits, and emerging threats or opportunities. The audit plan should be developed collaboratively with relevant stakeholders, including senior management and the risk management function, to ensure buy-in and alignment with organizational goals. The lead auditor's role involves evaluating the adequacy and effectiveness of the organization's risk management system, which includes assessing the appropriateness of the audit schedule in relation to the identified risk profile and the organization's commitment to continuous improvement in risk management. The audit schedule should be a reflection of the organization's risk management policy and objectives, ensuring that resources are allocated to areas where they are most needed to provide assurance on the effectiveness of risk controls. Question 25. Following a significant operational disruption caused by an unpredicted cyber threat, a lead auditor is reviewing the organization's risk management framework. The organization's risk register contained a general entry for cybersecurity threats, but lacked specific detail regarding the particular attack vector that caused the disruption. What is the most critical action the lead auditor should assess to ensure the organization's commitment to continuous improvement as per ISO 31000-2018? Option A: the immediate financial compensation provided to affected parties as a primary measure of risk mitigation success. Option B: the extent to which the organization has updated its risk assessment methodology and risk register to incorporate specific details and controls related to the identified cyber threat vector. Option C: the establishment of a dedicated internal audit function solely focused on cybersecurity risks after the event. Option D: the promptness with which the organization has communicated the incident to its stakeholders, regardless of the risk management process improvements. The correct answer is B: the extent to which the organization has updated its risk assessment methodology and risk register to incorporate specific details and controls related to the identified cyber threat vector. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes the importance of review and improvement as integral components of a robust risk management framework. Clause 9.3. Review and Clause 10. Improvement outline the necessity for organizations to continually assess and enhance their risk management processes. A lead auditor's role is to verify that these processes are not only established, but also effectively implemented and producing desired outcomes. When a lead auditor identifies a significant risk event that was not adequately anticipated or managed, this presents a critical opportunity to evaluate the effectiveness of the organization's risk assessment and treatment processes. The auditor's objective is to determine if the organization has mechanisms in place to learn from such events and integrate these learnings into future risk management activities. This involves examining how the root causes of the event were analyzed, whether the existing risk controls were found wanting, and if the organization has a structured approach to update its risk register, risk criteria, and risk treatment plans based on this new information. The focus is on the systemic improvements that should follow an incident, rather than just rectifying the immediate consequences. This aligns with the principle of continual improvement inherent in ISO 31000, ensuring that the risk management framework evolves to remain relevant and effective in a changing environment. The auditor is looking for evidence of a feedback loop where operational experiences, including failures or near misses, are systematically fed back into the risk management cycle to refine its inputs and processes. Question 26. During an audit of an organization's enterprise risk management framework, a lead auditor is reviewing the process for assessing the financial impact of cyber attacks. The risk model uses several input variables, including the probability of a specific breach occurring and the estimated cost of remediation. The auditor notes that the organization has not explicitly performed any analysis to understand how variations in these key input variables might affect the overall calculated risk level. What fundamental risk management technique is the organization neglecting, which is crucial for evaluating the reliability of its risk assessment outcomes and identifying the most influential factors? Option A, root cause analysis. Option B, sensitivity analysis. Option C, consequence analysis. Option D, scenario planning. The correct answer is B, sensitivity analysis. Explanation. Sensitivity analysis is a critical tool for understanding the robustness of risk assessment outcomes. It involves systematically changing key variables or assumptions within a risk model to observe the impact on the overall risk evaluation. For instance, if a risk assessment uses a probability of 0.7 and an impact of 100 units, resulting in a risk score of 70, sensitivity analysis would explore what happens if the probability is varied to 0.6 or 0.8, or if the impact is changed to 90 or 110 units. The goal is not to perform a precise calculation of the new score in isolation, but rather to identify which input parameters have the most significant influence on the output. A parameter that causes a large fluctuation in the risk score when slightly altered is considered highly sensitive. This helps auditors to focus their further investigation on areas where uncertainty has the greatest potential to alter the risk perception, thereby informing the reliability of the risk treatment decisions. It is particularly useful when dealing with complex models or when there is significant uncertainty in the input data, allowing for a more nuanced understanding of potential outcomes and the identification of critical control points. Question 27. Consider an organization that has established a robust risk register and conducts quarterly risk reviews. However, during an audit, it is observed that strategic decisions regarding market expansion are made without explicit reference to the identified strategic risks, and operational process improvements are implemented without a formal risk assessment of potential new hazards. What aspect of risk management integration, as per ISO 31000-2018, is likely deficient in this organization? Option A, the consistent embedding of risk considerations into all decision-making processes and activities, including strategic planning and operational improvements. Option B, the formal appointment of a risk management committee responsible for overseeing all risk-related activities. Option C, the establishment of a comprehensive risk register that accurately captures all potential threats and opportunities. Option D, the periodic review and updating of the organization's risk appetite statement in response to changing market conditions. Correct answer is A, the consistent embedding of risk considerations into all decision-making processes and activities, including strategic planning and operational improvements. Explanation. The core principle of integrating risk management into organizational processes, as espoused by ISO 31000-2018, is to ensure that risk considerations are embedded within all decision-making and activities, rather than being a standalone function. This involves aligning risk management with the organization's strategic objectives, governance structures, and operational workflows. Clause 5.2 of ISO 31000-2018, Integration with Organizational Processes, emphasizes that risk management should be an integral part of all organizational activities, including strategic planning, decision-making, and change management. It should not be a separate or add-on process. Effective integration means that risk appetite and tolerance are considered when setting objectives and making choices. It also implies that risk management activities are part of existing management systems and are supported by the organization's culture and leadership. Therefore, when auditing for effective integration, a lead auditor would look for evidence that risk management principles are woven into the fabric of the organization's operations, influencing how objectives are set, how resources are allocated, and how performance is monitored. This contrasts with approaches that treat risk management as a compliance exercise or a distinct departmental responsibility, which would indicate a lack of true integration. The focus is on proactive embedding rather than reactive mitigation within isolated processes. Question 28. When auditing an organization's risk management framework against ISO 31000-2018, what is the most critical aspect of the stakeholder identification and analysis process that a lead auditor must verify to ensure the framework's effectiveness and compliance with relevant regulatory considerations, such as those impacting public health and safety? Option A. The extent to which the organization prioritizes stakeholders based solely on their financial contribution or investment in the organization, ensuring their primary concerns are addressed. Option B. The comprehensive nature of the communication plan designed to inform all identified stakeholders about the organization's risk management activities, irrespective of their engagement level. Option C. The frequency with which stakeholder feedback is collected and incorporated into the risk register, regardless of the stakeholder's actual influence or relevance to specific risks. Option D. The systematic and documented methodology used to identify all relevant internal and external stakeholders, including their potential impact and influence on achieving organizational objectives, and how this analysis informs the risk appetite statement. Correct answer is D. The systematic and documented methodology used to identify all relevant internal and external stakeholders, including their potential impact and influence on achieving organizational objectives, and how this analysis informs the risk appetite statement. Explanation: the core of effective risk management, as guided by ISO 31000-2018, lies in understanding the context within which an organization operates and the diverse parties who can affect or be affected by its activities. Stakeholder identification is not merely a list-building exercise. It requires a nuanced analysis of their interests, expectations, potential influence, and their relationship to the organization's objectives. This analysis informs the entire risk management process, from defining the scope of risk assessments to developing appropriate treatment strategies. A lead auditor must be able to evaluate an organization's systematic approach to identifying and analyzing stakeholders, ensuring it is comprehensive and considers both internal and external parties. This includes examining how the organization determines who has a legitimate interest, whether they are directly involved or indirectly impacted, and how their perspectives are integrated into the risk framework. Failure to adequately identify and analyze stakeholders can lead to risks being overlooked, treatments being ineffective, or noncompliance with regulatory requirements that mandate stakeholder engagement, such as those found in environmental protection laws or data privacy regulations like GDPR, which implicitly require consideration of data subject rights. The process should be iterative, adapting as the organization's context evolves. Question 29. An organization has identified several potential risks that could impact its strategic objectives. As a lead auditor for ISO 31000-2018, you are reviewing their risk register and treatment plan. One risk involves a moderate likelihood of a supply chain disruption affecting a critical component, with a high potential consequence for production output and customer delivery. Another risk has a high likelihood of minor IT system glitches, with a low potential consequence for daily operations. A third risk, with a low likelihood but a catastrophic potential consequence, relates to a significant regulatory noncompliance event that could lead to severe penalties and reputational damage. Which of the following approaches best reflects the ISO 31000-2018 guidance for prioritizing these risks for treatment? Option A. Prioritize the IT system glitches due to their high likelihood, followed by the supply chain disruption, and then the regulatory noncompliance risk because of its low likelihood. Option B. Prioritize the risk of catastrophic regulatory noncompliance due to its potential for severe consequences, followed by the supply chain disruption due to its impact on production, and then the IT system glitches due to their high frequency but low impact. Option C. Prioritize all risks equally for immediate treatment, as the ISO 31000-2018 standard mandates that all identified risks must be addressed without distinction in priority. Option D. Prioritize the supply chain disruption risk as it directly impacts current production and delivery, then the IT system glitches due to their operational frequency, and lastly, the regulatory noncompliance due to its low probability. The correct answer is B. Prioritize the risk of catastrophic regulatory noncompliance due to its potential for severe consequences, followed by the supply chain disruption due to its impact on production, and then the IT system glitches due to their high frequency but low impact. Explanation: ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that risk treatment decisions, including prioritization, should be based on a comprehensive understanding of the organization's context, objectives, and the potential impact of risks. When prioritizing risks, a lead auditor must assess how effectively the organization is considering both the likelihood and consequence of identified risks, and importantly, how these are mapped against the organization's risk appetite and tolerance levels. The effectiveness of the risk treatment plan hinges on this alignment. A crucial element in this assessment is verifying that the organization has established clear criteria for prioritizing risks, which should be documented and consistently applied. This involves evaluating whether the organization considers the potential impact on its strategic, operational, financial, and reputational aspects, as well as any relevant legal or regulatory requirements. For instance, a risk with a moderate likelihood but a catastrophic consequence that directly threatens the organization's ability to meet its strategic objectives would likely be prioritized over a high likelihood, low consequence risk that has minimal impact on core operations. The auditor's role is to confirm that the prioritization process is systematic, objective, and demonstrably linked to achieving the organization's overall goals and managing its exposure within acceptable bounds, rather than simply focusing on the most frequently occurring risks or those with the most easily quantifiable financial losses. The process should also consider the interdependencies between risks and the potential for cascading effects. Question 30. An auditor is evaluating the design of a risk management framework for a multinational corporation operating in a highly regulated sector. The corporation has recently experienced significant financial losses due to unforeseen supply chain disruptions, which were not adequately identified or managed. The auditor needs to assess whether the framework's design inherently promotes proactive risk identification and integration with strategic decision-making. Which aspect of the framework's design would be the most critical indicator of its potential effectiveness in preventing future systemic failures of this nature? Option A. The comprehensiveness of the risk register, detailing every potential risk identified across all departments, regardless of its perceived likelihood or impact. Option B. The explicit inclusion of risk management responsibilities within the job descriptions of all senior management personnel and the documented linkage of risk appetite statements to strategic planning processes. Option C. The frequency of risk management training sessions conducted for all employees, ensuring a broad understanding of basic risk concepts and reporting procedures. Option D. The establishment of a dedicated risk management department with a significant budget, independent of operational units, to solely oversee risk identification and assessment. The correct answer is B. The explicit inclusion of risk management responsibilities within the job descriptions of all senior management personnel and the documented linkage of risk appetite statements to strategic planning processes. Explanation: the effectiveness of a risk management framework is critically dependent on its integration with the organization's governance and strategic objectives. ISO 31000-2018 emphasizes that the framework should be designed to support the achievement of objectives. This involves establishing clear roles and responsibilities, ensuring that risk management activities are embedded within existing processes, and fostering a culture that supports risk-aware decision-making. A key aspect of this design is the commitment from top management, which is crucial for providing the necessary resources and authority for risk management to be effective. The framework's design should also consider the organization's specific context, including its internal and external environment, as well as its risk appetite and tolerance. The integration with governance ensures that risk management is not a standalone activity, but an intrinsic part of how the organization is directed and controlled. This alignment with governance structures and strategic direction ensures that risk management contributes to the organization's resilience and its ability to achieve its goals, rather than becoming a bureaucratic exercise. The framework's design must also facilitate continuous improvement, allowing it to adapt to changing circumstances and organizational learning. This includes mechanisms for monitoring, review, and feedback to ensure the framework remains relevant and effective.